But the point that he's making, and he's actually going to talk about his own ministry, is that in this time, in this place, because the Israelis rejected him, generally speaking, right, nationally, because they eventually rejected Jesus more and more and more after the church was born there in Jerusalem, basically of almost all Jews. I mean, we don't know an exact number, but they were all there for the Feast of Pentecost. So the reason that Jerusalem was swelling was so big, because Jerusalem normally was about 15,000 people, they estimate, in Jesus' day. When we think of a big city, I don't know about you, I'm from Southern California, I think like going to LA where it's like 3 million in the area. And so when I read something in the Bible and it's like the city was packed, I'm like, oh, it was like downtown LA. Not really, it was 15,000 people. It's interesting because Nazareth in Jesus' birth, they estimate to be about 400 people. But based on the graves that they found at Nazareth, at digs and so forth. So it kind of gives you a perspective of how many, what populace was like in those days. It's not like here so much. Anyway, all that to say, he's going to talk about his ministry. He's talking about all these things. And what's going to happen, because he makes the point in verse 13, that in this time, in this place, that since the Jews begin to reject and persecute the gospel, he stops talking to them, right? 3 times in the book of Acts. 3 times, whether it's in Ephesus, these different places, Paul shows up. Where does he go? The synagogue, right? Every time. Goes to the synagogue. He talks in there for like a week or 2, depending on how long they'll have him in the synagogue. And eventually, and it's always almost the same point. It's almost always the same point. As soon as he says that God has invited the Gentiles too, they're like, you have to die. We're going to kill you now. We were kind of into this Jesus thing. We were willing to listen to the resurrection. We didn't know if we were super bought into it. But as soon as you say that God's going to save the Gentiles, immediately they say, we're going to kill you. Why? Why do they say that? Why is it the biggest hang-up that they have isn't the resurrection? And we're not talking about the Pharisees now. We're talking about Judaism in general. It's not the resurrection. It's not that the Messiah could have come. It's when Paul says Gentiles can get saved. Why is that the deal breaker? Why is that when even in his Jesus ministry, when he mentions Naaman being the only leper that was cleansed in the old covenant, and they're like, we're going to kill you now. Because Jews, especially leading up to Jesus, for the last 800 years before Jesus, basically got raped and pillaged, literally, by every nation that came by. By the Romans, by Greeks, everyone. And so to a Jew, the idea who had, they're still under Roman rule, right? Their prisoners go to Rome. Rome executes their prisoners. Rome decides who's going to be the high priest. You ever wonder why is there 2 high priests in the New Testament, Caiaphas and Ananias? Why is there 2? Because one is a political appointee from Rome because he bid enough money to get it. And the other one is basically who Jews want it to be. For lack of a better term. So they're controlled. Every portion of their life. I think I mentioned this before. My wife and I started watching The Chosen. It's a fine show. It's great. But there's this one part, I just chuckled because there's this one part in The Chosen where Mary Magdalene's like walking down the street, and in the background, you see one of the Roman guards like edge around her and then keep walking. No, my friends. He would have kicked her in the chest and shoved her down. That's how the Romans ruled. This is during Pilate's reign. Remember how Jesus brings up the fact that Pilate mixed the blood of Jews with pigs and then sacrificed to one of their gods? So historically, for the idea that one of these pig-raising, pig blood-having people who've dominated them for 8 centuries, different cultures, could just believe on Messiah and have the same gift and calling that they did, they couldn't buy into it. It just couldn't be. And so every time it gets brought up, they reject that. And they go, no, we're not going to have any part of this. They sought a righteousness, and they never attained it because they sought it by works. Now, these are all parallels for us. We have to be careful as the church, don't we? Because we can be right there with them. we can clean ourselves up a little bit and then be like, oh, I can't believe you're really like that. Oh, I don't want to deal with this. Right? We can think that way. And we can say, there's just no way, like, really? You think you're going to come into my church? Like, I saw you last week. I know how you act. This isn't unique to the Jews. This is just humanity, how we respond when we seek our own righteousness. So what happens is Paul then, every single time he leaves, and where does he go? He goes to the Gentiles. And he preaches the gospel. So we're running out of time here. We're not going to kind of go into the rest of this, but it's important to understand as we look at and as we cover God working all these things for good, right? In the Jews, in the Gentiles, he's not making these kind of blanket statements that there's this arbitrary sovereignty occurring. It's based on the foreknowledge of who would choose him. And for those people that would choose him, he gave a destiny. And now he's working everything together for good for those people that he called that love him and now are every aspect of their lives and every thing, sphere of authority, every difficulty, every whatever it might be, he's working that together to good for them. And in this case, in Paul's day, in Paul's time, the Gentiles began to hear the gospel because the Jews rejected it. And it's very, I don't know, physically doesn't sound right, but it's very just simple and physical. Hey, I'm going to the synagogue. Get out of here. We're going to kill you. Okay, cool. I'm going to go to the Gentiles. Right? That's how it worked. And now if we look at Israel today and where they're at today, are there Israelis getting saved? Yeah. Yeah, there are, right? Well, there's missionaries over in Israel, and they're doing Bible studies, and people are getting saved. But as a nation, are they embracing Messiah? No, they're not embracing Messiah. Not even a little bit. But one day, and this is what we'll talk about next week, one day, God will work in them, and those whom he foreknew will receive him. But it'll be on a much larger level because there'll be, in my opinion, because, for example, there will be a revelation of who he is, again, for them. That all his promises and all the things he said in the Old Covenant, all the promises about peace in Jerusalem, all the promises about reigning on the earth, all the promises of, and if you look at the promises of God primarily to the Jews, they were physical, right? If you walk with me, then you'll have a lot of cows. Your cows won't get sick. I'm not a rancher, so I don't know what woman cows are, but your female cows will have calves or whatever. They'll have healthy babies. You'll have healthy babies. You'll have a lot of crops, right? Those were kind of the promises to Israel, along with peace and these type of things. Interesting that the church doesn't really get any of those promises, do they? Our promises are way more like there were people that walked around naked and lived in caves and were tortured and they suffered and they wouldn't take a deliverance by forsaking Jesus. Those people the world wasn't worthy of. We get way more promises, way less promises God will provide for us, right? He says, hey, don't worry about tomorrow. Don't worry about the clothes you're going to wear. Don't worry about the food you're going to eat. We don't get a lot of like, hey, everything's going to be amazing for you. We kind of get more the opposite. Like, chances are you're really going to suffer a lot. And then after that comes glory with Christ. Whereas the Old Covenant promises are all like, hey, you don't have to suffer. You can have amazing land and property and tons of cows and goats and all that. So it's kind of interesting how the two covenants have worked out. But all those promises of old will someday be accomplished in the millennial reign. And God is going to begin working with the Jews again during the last week of Daniel. And when we see the revelation and the different things that are happening, whether it's from angels or the two prophets in Israel or these different things, that are going to be coming about. So, and persecution from the dragon, all these different things.